And welcome back. Now, just how has an ailing economy coupled with the COVID-19 pandemic actually affected South Africa's future? Now, tens of thousands of jobs are being shed, and we spoke to that in the previous hour. And even strong companies are now facing very tough times and very tough decisions. But is it likely that the next decade could still see poor economic growth, inequality and social unrest exacerbated by the challenges of poverty and unemployment? Those are some of the questions that the Indlulamithi Scenarios of 2030 project seeks to answer at its third annual Indlulamithi Day, to be hosted later today. Now, the project will also unveil the latest results from its National Barometer, which provides a perspective on exactly how South Africa is performing given its social, economic and political challenges. And Professor Somadoda Fikeni is a political analyst and also project leader of the Indlulamithi Scenarios South Africa, and he joins us now via Skype. Professor, good morning. Always a pleasure speaking to you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you for inviting me, and good morning to your viewers.
So let's just start by revisiting the concept of Indlulamithi Scenarios 2030 and what exactly it seeks to achieve, Prof.
It seeks to project us into what will happen in the near future and into 10 years from now. And it seeks to answer the question, how would a socially cohesive South Africa look like? And to what extent is it achievable in 2030? And social cohesion here includes everything that the preamble of our Constitution contains: an inclusive economy, social solidarity, and nationhood, as well as reduction of inequality.
So, given that we are a deeply divided society, at least by anecdotal indication, what would social cohesion look like in South Africa in 2030, looking at what we are dealing with now?
In the scenarios that we is Bourgeois, Kwara, as well as Nile Walk, we had to be more realistic in analyzing in a systematic way the current realities, and we came up with those three storylines, which indicate that we will not have been freed of most of the problems that we're facing, but the Kwara would be the worst case scenario. And Bourgeois is more likely to be what we have right now, continuing as a status quo that is not tampered with. Then Nile Walk would be a slightly better situation, which could see the reduction of unemployment, the overhauling of our education system and the economy, as well as issues such as land reform being handled well, having positive outcome.
And Prof, just looking at how all South Africans, black and white, enjoy this constitutional democracy, how would you say it impacts and what is the meaning, at least from what you can gauge from the information that you have, for the different race groups at this time?
The biggest problem that we face here is inequality, and that to some degree has the legacy impact into it, the apartheid geography, and that in itself is what has made it almost impossible to make real the promises of our Constitution. And that is why you do have resentment, you do have resistance, the protest and so forth. And it is the biggest challenge that ought to be tackled in order to have an inclusive economy, in order to have a socially cohesive South Africa where everybody feels like they belong. But until that is done, which is the major thing, it looks like that dream is unrealizable. It will take a capable state and capable institutions, even in the private sector, civil society, as well as a strong leadership to deal with those particular challenges.
But does the leadership in all of those different spheres, do they actually have the appetite to deal with inequality, Prof?
Not all of them. There seemed not to be political conviction in terms of its intensity, but again, as you indicated, we're a divided society. Therefore, others will always have different perspectives in terms of how to tackle the same problem. And others may even have a lip service into ending inequality, but without tampering with the very deep structural and institutional hurdles that make that an impossibility. It is also some of the poor policy choices, even where there is a well-intentioned goal to end inequality. If you do have a set of policies which is poor, then you won't get there. And it is exactly this kind of economic modeling that you will hear about today when the results are presented as to what kind of policy instruments, if shifted, would land us in a better position.
And of course, we'll have to wait until you actually make that announcement formally to take that discussion further. But we spoke in the previous hour to an economist, Mike Schuessler, looking at the economic situation. And so we know how South Africa is performing economically. It is dire. We are seeing a jobs bloodbath, Professor. But how is South Africa performing socially and politically at this stage?
Most of the time, when the economic indicators not looking good, it affects both politics and the social cohesion. Therefore, it leads to the very fragmentation that you see. But given the current crisis of COVID-19 pandemic, it might also provide an opportunity for the country to press a reset button and overhaul a range of things. So out of this crisis, you could also have an opportunity to rethink, and you also have an opportunity for a social compact where different role players learn to work together. You are already seeing Solidarity Fund. You are already seeing a lot of negotiations at NADLAC, which means different role players are beginning to realize that not one, not even government alone, will be able to solve these problems. And many other countries like South Korea, Germany after the World War, Japan, many were able to reset their economies and set themselves on a path of rapid development after a crisis.
Now, Professor, you also will be talking about the National Barometer, but what exactly is its purpose, and what perspectives will that National Barometer bring that could help propel South Africa forward?
National Barometer, measured nationally and this time for the first time provincially as well, is set to assess how people are perceiving the country in terms of these hard trends, in terms of institutional capacity, in terms of leadership, in terms of inequality, and in terms of, their resentment, the feeling or resistance towards what is being done. And that barometer is tracking to see if people believe we are drifting towards Isibujwa, or we are drifting towards Gwaragwara, or we are drifting towards Nailewok, which is a better scenario. So that gauges the mood of the country in terms of how they perceive the very hard trends that we're talking about.
And then, Prof, is there a relationship between the Indlulamithi 2030 project and the goals of the country's National Development Project 2030? And if there is a link between the two, what exactly is it?
There is not exactly a link. One is a project of government which came up with those goals, and it set 2030 as the timeline. And when we established the Indlulamithi South Africa Scenarios 2030, we looked at 2030 as an important marker to assess how the country was performing, of course, to some degree informed by the same timeline as the National Development Plan, but not necessarily based on it, because we go beyond looking as to whether we can even achieve some of the goals which are presented there. We were also influenced by the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which puts 2030 as the timeline. So that is the reason behind the coincidence of time, not that these are born out of each other.
And then just finally, Professor, how will people get to participate in today's event given the COVID-19 circumstances, and what exactly will happen today?
Today, we will have in a studio the key speakers who will be present there physically, of course, observing social distancing rules. But most of the people in our invitation list, which is an open invitation, will be participating virtually. There will even be question and answer session, especially for the media and some of the participants. And I can tell you, when you look at our RSVP, it is a who is who of people, from ministers to some of prominent leaders, to people in the judiciary, to people in business sector and opinion makers, up to the ordinary people, including the unemployed.
So we look forward to that, and no doubt we'll talk more to what your actual findings are and what you'll be sharing with the nation later on today. Thank you so much, Professor Somadoda Fikeni, political analyst and one of the leaders of the Indlulamithi Scenarios 2030. And that, of course, will be discussing whether South Africa is still on course for a 2030 future with an improved economic and social and otherwise outlook for growth and a united society. So that's taking place later today. Well,